just like. When you guys hear Hannah's story, I don't even belong up here anyway. I should be down here.
You're the one for miracle.
I should be down here to hear this.
So when Hannah and Chuck got married, a little over a year ago, Jax was Chuck's best man. Yeah. Wow.
So
He did everything.
This is not his first time here at Redemption.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. It's been a while since we've done backstories, and we're glad to be able to start it back up. And this is going to be, I think they're all special, but this is extra special. With Hannah and Chuck. I've known Hannah for probably 8 years now, 7 years?
6, I know.
Or 6. It seems like 8. And I've known Chuck for almost 2 now, maybe. And their story is absolutely amazing. And really, I'm just here to sort of tee it up for them so that they can tell their story. I just also want to welcome our live stream. We're on YouTube, Redemption Arcadia, and apparently we're on your Facebook as well. So that's awesome. We're glad that you're all with us. My name is Frank Switzer. I'm one of the pastors here at Redemption Arcadia, and this is Hannah and Chuck Keels. So I'm going to just start with trying to get us a little bit of context. I need your elevator speech, each of you, on where you're from, where you grew up, and all of the stuff sort of pre your current story. That's what we're looking for in a condensed fashion, because we really want to focus mostly on your story.
Yeah, it's always best to start with you.
And remember, Chuck, we have 75 minutes.
I know, that's the hard thing. So I'm from a little town in Ohio called Fosbury, Ohio. Went to Ohio State, the Ohio State, and was in Columbus for about another 10 years, and had a chance to come out to Phoenix and Las Vegas and parts of California on some business. And I'm an outside guy, so anything to do with hiking, biking, kayaking, that kind of stuff. And I come out here on some business trips, and on the third trip out, I looked at this guy and I'm like, what are you doing going back to Ohio? And so I packed up everything, and 26 years ago, moved to Arcadia. Lived right here in this area 26 years ago.
And you were a landscape architect?
Not at that time I wasn't, but over the years I got into landscaping and then design and install. So swimming pools, landscaping, front yards, backyards. And for an Ohio boy to be outside 365 days a year was a dream come true, so I thought it was really neat.
Yeah. And you did some like bodybuilding too, didn't you?
Oh my
I
gosh.
should have snuck that picture.
What?
I wish you had.
What?
You got some guns, my brother.
So when I was younger, I was in really good shape, and I really like to stay in good shape. And I even trained with somebody of mine that was training for the Olympic wrestling team. And my goal was always to outdo him. And so the workout was crazy, and I stayed in such good shape that I actually got a job as a fitness model way back. And I did that for 12 years, part-time. Fun, yeah.
So you just look at the pictures, Hannah? Is that what?
Yes.
Okay. So you were out here,
Okay.
and now we hit the pause button, right?
What's that?
You were out here, and now we hit the pause button. Is that right?
Yeah. I got out here, worked around. I went from Arcadia out to Gilbert, lived in Gilbert for 18 years, and basically that's where I started the landscaping business, and that's where when we unpause me, we'll go back into my story that started in Gilbert, Arizona.
Okay. Then Hannah, your story, your pre-story.
Yeah, so I was born in the Netherlands. So still am a citizen of the European Union. Moved when I was 6 to New Jersey. So I actually grew up on the East Coast, lived in New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, had 4 children, was previously married for 21 years till I moved here in 2015. How much more do you want? I went to school for nursing, so I was an OR nurse for most of my career.
And tell us about how old are your boys now?
So right now, it's going to be harder without adding his in. He has 2,
Okay.
and it's a little more fun.
So So you have 6 boys
We
total.
do. So I'm just going to tell you 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23.
True
These
story.
came to us. It's fit right in.
So you got 6 guys. Are they a hockey team that play?
No, we got a basketball team with one guy on the bench.
Okay. So both of you have, I guess you would call separate stories with being diagnosed with cancer, which is eventually what brought you together. But let's start with your individual story on that, Chuck.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what I call a snapshot, because I could very easily get up here and talk for an hour straight just about what just happened to me. And the reason why is because I still get chills telling the story. It's something you probably will never hear anything like it again in person, maybe on TV or something. And out of the thousands of people that I've talked to in the last 6 years, I've met maybe 2 people that have a story kind of like mine, but not like mine. So in 2015, I was running my landscaping business, and I started getting tired, and I started losing some weight, and I couldn't figure out what was going on, and I started taking aspirin, which I don't like to do. And pretty soon the pain started outrunning the aspirin. My back was hurting, and I started having health problems. And so it got so bad that the last 2 days, I remember carrying my briefcase with me into the office, and I could barely carry it. My back hurt that bad. So on a Friday night, I went downtown Gilbert to the food truck with my boys, and we went home and popped in a movie. And I couldn't get comfortable on the couch. Threw some pillows and blankets on the floor. Couldn't get comfortable there. So I told my boys, they were junior high school, when you go to bed, I'm going over to Gilbert Mercy Hospital to see if we can figure out what's going on here. So I go over to Gilbert Mercy Hospital. I barely get in the door. They start running scans and tests and x-rays. And the first thing that comes back fast is just your basic x-ray. And the emergency room doctor sticks his head in. He says, "You've got 2 fractured vertebrae in your back." I'm like, "Who walks around with a broken back? What do you mean?" I'm like, "How did it happen? I haven't fallen or anything." And so what happened was they came back at 5 in the morning and they said, "We got bad news. Everything that's going on is all cancer related." And my head starts to spin. And so they bring in specialists the next day. They get into the biopsies, the bone marrow, the lymph nodes, and all that stuff. And then they send me home for a few days until they get the results. And I explained to my 2 boys that the word cancer was brought up, but we didn't know how bad, what it was, or anything. And so basically, 3 days went by, they call me up, I go into the office, they shut the door. He looks at me and says, "I can't believe you just walked in here." He said, "I've never seen scans like this before, and the guy's still walking around." He says, "You've got cancer in 90% of the bones in your body." And if you guys want to catch up with me afterwards, I'll show you pictures on my phone. It's absolutely unbelievable. The scans. Do we have? Yeah, that's me. That's one of my.
So
That's when I was a sports model. No, that's not. That's not at all. But that's basically the blackest cancer in my bones. And he says it's so bad we can't tell you what kind of cancer it is. We don't know the origination. It's so bad that you're stage 4. There is nothing we can do at this point. You might have about 3 months to live. Just go home and be comfortable with your family. I go home. I have to tell my boys when they came in from school that they just told me that I might make it 3 months. It was an absolute nightmare. And so we said, "What do you do with 3 months to live? What do you do with this?" And I said, "You know what? Let's head back to Ohio." And I'm thinking, what I really need to do is get my boys back there so my family can watch them. And I was telling everybody, you know, what I want to do is spend time with my mom and dad, people I love, if I've got 3 months to live. So there's some interesting lessons that actually started happening in the story, and I didn't realize they were lessons at that time, and now I look back and I tell the story. But the first thing that happened was we gave away everything I owned, except a couple suitcases, Because when you're diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, how important is all that furniture and those flat screen TVs and those all the stuff that I worked so hard for, all of a sudden meant absolutely zero, nothing. And so we gave it away. We stayed at the Hilton Tapatio Cliffs over here because I didn't have a bed. We didn't have any place to sleep. So it said, let's stay over there because we're getting on a plane the next morning and headed back to Columbus, Ohio. So we stayed at Hilton Tapatio Cliffs. The next morning I get up and I'm going down the hall and something pops and I hit the floor. And I'm laying there and I couldn't even imagine pain like I was feeling. All I could think of was someone was stabbing me in the back with a knife. And if I tried to move, or if I even tried to breathe, you know how your diaphragm works when you breathe? I couldn't even get a good breath. The pain was so excruciating. So 911 was called. The fire department showed up at the Hilton, and they get me in an ambulance, and every movement, every bump was excruciating. And so they get me in this ambulance over to John C. Lincoln Hospital, which is the closest. And there they start running their own scans. And then the next day they bring in what they call a team. And I'm on liquid morphine at this point, which is called, let's just make you comfortable so you can maybe get back to Ohio or just get through the day. So they come back in the room with 2 spinal surgeons, a cancer doctor, and a house doctor who became my medical team. And they said, we're looking at your scans, and we want to fight this. It started in your prostate, which was the first time I heard that. It started in your prostate, and you let it go for who knows how long. This could have been cooking in there for 2 or 3 years, but it goes to where it's fed, and it got into your lymph nodes and your bone marrow, and it carried it all over your body. And what we need to do is stop the feeding of the cancer, and we need to start killing the cancer, and that's how we're going to fight this. And that means 2 surgeries tomorrow and your first round of chemo in 2 days. And they said, what do you think about that? And I said, what choice do I have? I'm a fighter anyway, you know. So a fight's a fight. And so I'm in, you know, let's see where this goes. So I went into 2 surgeries the next day where they stopped my testosterone production because it was feeding the cancer. And they also put a port in my chest, which is a device that they plugged the needle into to take your chemo in. And so they did the 2 surgeries, and it took about 2.5 hours. And I'm in the recovery room, and it's an older hospital, and it's a long room, and there's a lot of curtains. And as interesting as this sounds, even on liquid morphine, I remember every light, I remember every doctor's name, I remember every nurse's name like it was yesterday. And I'm laying there, and the docs came out after I had woken up and I was drinking water and everything was coming to, and they explained that the surgeries went perfectly. The nurses brought me water and said, your family's upstairs waiting for you. So I'm just kind of hanging out there watching everything going on around me, and for no reason at all, the entire room turns frigid cold. And I see a brown robe, white scarf, his beard in his face. I see his right foot take a half a step towards me, and he reaches out and touches me on the shoulder, and he's gone. And I'm freaking out. I'm like, what was that? And why me? Okay? An old Catholic boy from Ohio, very lost in my spiritual walk. And I just had a visitor, and I knew it wasn't a doctor, a nurse, or even a janitor. I was in the presence of Jesus. And at the time, I heard in my head, I got you. I got you. And I get rolled upstairs. I tell my family what's going on. Everybody's in tears. They're like, what are you talking about? And we didn't know what it meant. The next day, the nurses come in, flip on the switch at 6 o'clock, like you've slept at all in the hospital with all the bells and whistles and stuff going on around you. And they say, it's time for your meds. Here's your steroids for shrinking the tumors. Here's your bone strengtheners. And then your pain meds are as needed. So on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the worst, how bad is your pain? And I sit up and I'm looking at him and I'm like, I don't feel any pain. And they're looking at me like, order something. They said, order something. you just had surgery, broke your back a couple days ago, and you were on liquid morphine. You're going to need something, Chuck. Here's the nurse button. Push it as soon as you feel something because we don't want it to get too crazy. We want to stay ahead of it. So hit the button when you need us. And from that day in May of 2015 to right now, April 26th, I never touched another pain med. And let me tell you, I was blown away by what happened to me, but I'm really blown away now with this story going on next to me and the pain and what you deal with going through a compression fracture or a broken back. And what happened was I started healing so fast I couldn't explain it. And you see the pictures of my bones, and I can show you the pictures on my phone. And if you go back on my Facebook page 4 years ago, and you look at me and you're like, it's not the same guy. I was dying. I was pale. Jaundice was setting in. It smelled funny. My hair was falling out. I was down 40 pounds. My muscle was melting off my body so fast. That's why it's kind of funny to talk about me being a fitness guy, because I still am, but my body changed in this deal. What was going on with either the cancer or the medication? I don't know which was worse on me, but I'm laying in the hospital bed looking at my little skinny legs, and I'm like, whose legs are these? This isn't even me. And so I went from John C. Lincoln Hospital for 10 days, the Mayo Clinic for 5 weeks because I'm in a back brace they fitted me for, and I can't even bend over and tie my own shoes. And so I'm up there, and some really neat things happen, and I'm trying to shut my story down a little bit so it doesn't carry on and take up the whole 75 minutes. But what happened was, I started through chemo because that was the plan, right? I'm not changing that plan. I'm human. I'm still thinking, am I going to even live through this? I got 2 boys to raise. And what happened was, on the bad days, and when I say bad days, that meant the days that I got chemo and it floored me. It completely kicked my butt. And I mean, I had my shoes on the side of the bed, and I'm an old farm boy from Ohio, and I wake up at 4:30 in the morning, and I still do, and I slipped into my shoes and stood up because I wanted to go outside and walk down the street, and I took 3 steps and barely made it back to the bed and slept for 6-8 hours for 3 days until the chemo started wearing off. That was the bad days. On the good days, when I didn't feel like that and I could get my shoes on and get out the door, if you guys know where the Mayo Clinic is up there off of Bell Road, and if you don't, just Google it because it's in the middle of nowhere. Greg lives up there, and they're building a lot of stuff up there, but back then, 5 years ago, it was just in the middle of the desert, and so I walked out into the desert. I love to hike, I love to be outside. When people started finding out I was in the desert, they were like, what? What you're going through, if you're in the desert, you better drop us a pin or something because, in case something happens to you. But the coolest thing in the world happened to me, and when I walked into the desert, I wanted to see if my arms could move, and they started to move pretty decent. I was surprised because of a broken back. And then I started chatting with God, and I said, I've been completely taken out of society. I don't have my kids. I don't have my job. I don't have my health. And I'm getting mad. How we go through these things, feeling sorry for yourself. It's just me and you, what gives? And I never thought how important, when someone says any prayer is important, how about a prayer? What gives? What gives? And I hear this spiritual voice in my head, and he says, you've wasted so much time in your life. He says, you're going to get it back little by little. And as you do, I want you to start focusing on what you're truly passionate about. I'm freaking out. I'm chatting with God, and I'm getting direct answers. I just couldn't believe what was going on. And when I said the lesson of giving everything away, the material things in life, my conversations with God about what's really passionate and what we really, really care about, those lessons started then and have built so much that Hannah said you need to write a book on just the lessons that you've learned in the last 6 years since this happened. And then what happened was I started healing so fast that every time I went to chemo once a week, they do a blood test. And what happened was 3 months into the chemo, my doctor, she's from Pakistan, and I don't know what her spiritual belief is, but I go into there, she reads the blood test before I leave, and so I go in and she's smiling, and I already had my 3 hours of drip. I went in, she would read my blood test, and she smiled, and she goes, I have never seen anything like this before in my life. She said, I've studied cancer stories all over the world. She said, I don't have an explanation for this. Your journey is definitely not of medicine. It's miraculous because your blood test looks like a normal, healthy guy. 3 months after I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and was told I had 3 months to live. I'm back swimming 20 laps in the pool. I'm stretching and I'm going to the gym, and my body melted down, and I couldn't go in there and put the pin under the entire stack, but I could put it under the top one. And there's a few times that I went in there and I was in the parking lot thinking, what are you even doing? You know, the devil starts creeping in. What are you even doing here? You're wasting your time. And God says, get in there. Get in there and do what you do. And I just started thinking, mind over matter, mind over matter. And I'll tell you one more quick thing before we flip over, is something really cool happened. This is one of my favorite things. At the end of the 6 months of chemo, they couldn't find any cancer in my body at all. They did a nuclear bone scan to see my bone density because they were very concerned with all the metastasis all over my body. They do a nuclear bone scan. I'm sitting behind a bone cancer specialist and her assistant, and they're talking and they're flipping through the screen on the computer looking at my bones, and then they look back at me and they're like, can you see this? And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not a doctor. It looks like a skeleton to me. And they're like zooming in on the bones, and they're like, if we did, where's that picture that you showed? Oh, she's down. They said, if we didn't know you and we didn't see your previous scans, we would think you're lying because your bones are perfectly clean. I walked into the parking lot in tears. And I was going to my car, and all I could hear in my head was, Lazarus, get up and walk. Get up and walk. And we know what you're preaching about next week. And I'm telling you guys, I was the dead guy. I was the guy that was down to nothing. And I met people with a lot of mental things and things going on in their life. I had a physical near-death experience, and it was all changed by God waking me up, touching me on the shoulder, and sending me in a different direction. And when you hear what's happened to my life since that, you can't plan these things.
So you've been cancer-free now since then?
No, actually, the cancer was so bad, they won't stamp me cancer-free or in remission because a guy that's 56 years old that has stage 4 cancer and 90% of your bones are saturated with cancer, no doctor will ever put their name on that. So they will not stamp me in remission or cancer-free. So if you talk to the doctors, they're going to say he's thriving with cancer. But what do you guys think? You know, it's that crazy.
These scans are clean scans.
Yeah, and I go in every 6 months, just like every other cancer patient, and I go in and my doc says, let's just start meeting for lunch because this is a waste of time. He says, your blood test is better than mine.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So then what happened with you?
So I moved here, like I said, in 2015. About 6 months after I moved, I'm going to give you a little backstory. Hey, that's why we're here, right? That's not funny.
Backstory.
So 6 months after I moved here, I was married at the time, had my 4 teenage sons, and just kind of out of the blue, my husband of that time confessed that he'd been unfaithful and just was ready to leave the marriage and did not want to try to stay together. And that floored me. It literally took the rug out from underneath me. And I've been a believer all my life, from as young as I can remember. And this was like the biggest test of my faith. And the only thing I could do was go to God. And so that was January 2016. About 3 months later, I found a lump in my breast. It took a few months to figure it out and find a doctor and get tested. And by that August, I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. That September, my divorce went final. October, I had a double mastectomy. And that November, I had to get back to work as a full-time nurse to keep my kids alive. I have 4 teenagers to feed. I ended up having to take care of them financially for a year and a half. And it was such a difficult time for me. And it was the time where I learned to just go to Jesus for everything. I couldn't do it by myself. I couldn't provide financially for myself. So he became my provider, going through all of these new things of insurance and having to just navigate being a mother by myself, a parent by myself, learning that God was my kid's parent. There are so many things that he taught me. During that time as well, I lost my job. A year later, my breast cancer spread again. So I couldn't work any longer as the OR nurse. So I, lost my career, which was part of my identity at the time. So this is a whole new understanding of who it was, that it wasn't all of these things that I was holding on to on earth, that it was God was my identity. And during that time, I also befriended a girl from church here. She was my very best friend for 2 years. And during some of this time that we were best friends, she took her own life. And I know some of you know her and loved her. And that was the 5th and hardest, I think, of the 5 losses that I endured in a 2.5-year span. I ended up writing a book about it, which is also how we met. So there were a lot of losses, but in those losses, I found Christ. I found hope that I couldn't do this by myself. I couldn't live without him. And it just grew my faith every day. So I was stable for 2.5 years with my cancer. I was just taking a pill and feeling pretty good. Even though I wasn't working, I was able to do a lot. So I ended up coming here a lot because I lived 3 blocks away. And, I was so used to being busy. So it was just a really neat time for me to be able to help volunteer. So I ended up volunteering a lot for the children's ministry. And because of the medicine I was on, I didn't really want to be exposed to all the germs. So I did a lot of the background stuff, and I loved helping Heather. I ended up meeting Heather because of Sarah passing.
So Heather was our children's coordinator at the time, and she's been a part of this church for longer than I've been, so more than 10 years.
So Heather also happens to be Chuck's cousin. And so as I said, I ended up writing a book called Faith Like Skin, available on the back table. He also wrote it. So I ended up going because I do not like summers in Phoenix. I love Phoenix except for the summers.
Amen.
I spent the entire month of July out east visiting family and wrote the big portion of the book and came home and I was telling Heather, I'm like, I don't know how to publish this thing. I've written it and I don't know how to publish it. And she's like, I'm not sure why I've never told you about my cousin. I have a cousin named Chuck. Chuck heals. So I wrote that down. She's like, you need to meet him. He just published his own book and he had end-stage cancer. And as she's saying this, she was kind of thinking like this could be like the very worst thing ever, or it could be a really good thing. I said that. So we all know how that turned out. So I was like, okay, look him up, because she didn't have his phone number. So I looked him up on Facebook, and I can't friend him because he has 5,000 friends. And if you know anything about Facebook, you have 5,000 friends, that's a cap. So I can't add him as a friend, and if you send somebody a message, that's not your friend, it goes to that other folder that you might not find. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to message him. I sat on it for about 2 weeks, and then I wrote him a message, and I prayed over it. And I was like, God, if you want him to find this, if ever, I'm leaving it in your hands. And it was basically like, hi, I have 4 kids, I have breast cancer, I wrote a book, I'm trying to figure out how to write it, how to publish it, could you help me? So that was August of 19. I'm losing my years a little bit. So yeah, August 2019, August 28th, and he found it exactly a month later. I'm gonna pass it to you.
So what happened was, I'm just one of those guys that social media was just starting to get popular, and I had maybe 500 or 600 people from Ohio and LA and places I've been, and so it was no big deal. But after my story started coming out about what happened with your cancer, the friends started coming out of the woodwork. Most people I didn't know, and there's a lot of people with cancer that wanted to chat. And so I started adding these friends, and I didn't know that a Facebook page, when it gets to 5,000, it tops off and stops. And then you've got to go open up what they call a fan page, and that's unlimited. And that, just never even crossed my mind. And so I've got my buddies and stuff on my Facebook page, so I don't want to change that. And what happens if someone's not your friend, they can communicate with you by sending you a message through Messenger, but it goes into this other mailbox. When I say the other mailbox, is because it's a lot of scammers and jammers and people that are not your friend on Facebook, but whatever reason, and especially if they found out that you're working in the cancer industry or you're doing something like this. So once a month, I made a note that I would sit down and that I would just clear that box out. And so it was that night, and I was clearing out the box, and I was just deleting message after message, and I get to this message, and it mentions, she knows my cousin Heather, cancer, I'm writing a book, and I'm looking at this message, and I'm like, I cannot believe I missed this 30 days ago, 1 month ago. And so I go on right away and I said, I am so sorry I missed this, because I work with cancer people now, and if I hear the word cancer, I want to talk to you right now. I'm not going to wait 30 days. I want to talk to you right now. So I apologize. I'm so sorry I missed your message. I cannot believe this. Let's have coffee. Let's talk about this. And I click and I send it.
Well, I was in Holland. Like I said, I grew up in the Netherlands for 6 years. And so for the last 2 years, in 2018 and 2019, I would go back and stay with my cousins because it was basically free. So it was a really great time. I have cousins on each side of the family that are my age, and it was such a sweet time to reconnect with all my family. So I'm like, well, that's gonna be a little hard. You're gonna have to wait a couple of weeks because I'm overseas. And so he starts looking up my Facebook page and
Stalking.
Stalker. And so we start communicating on Messenger, and eventually share phone numbers and send video chats. If you know Marco Polo, it's like Snapchat for adults.
So there was 3 weeks where she was in Holland, and I'm like, how do you meet somebody when she's in Holland? So we start chatting, but we started to get to know each other, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The 5 huge challenges that she just talked about. I'm looking at this person, and she's got this glow and this smile, and you guys know her. She walks into the room, and everybody knows Hannah, and I'm like, you just went through 5 crazy things in your life. I said, I deal with coaching cancer people, and I said, usually it's a few other things too. It becomes what I call life coaching, because it's, by the way, I went through a divorce, or I lost a loved one, or a business failed. Something happened, kind of traumatic, and a cancer story, and they get so far off track because of these things that most of the time they never really get back to where they started. And I'm talking to this beautiful young lady with this smile and this laughter, and I'm blown away. And I said, okay, so you're telling me about these 5 unbelievable hurdles in your life. I said, how are you doing this? And she's like, go ahead, you tell me. You tell me.
Every time I get closer to Jesus.
Every time.
And what I loved was we were able to talk about Jesus. And then he tells me his miracle story, and I'm like, this guy can handle my story. This guy can handle my backstory. He can handle the fact that I have cancer. Most men wouldn't want to get in a relationship with you if you have cancer. If you have stage 4 cancer, for sure.
I understood, and it was kind of an interesting conversation. No one would think it's funny because here we are talking about cancer, and we're like, I've tried to date, but who wants me after that? My body melted down and my emotions, and I get in the car and a good song comes on and I'm crying like a baby, I'm like, who wants me
We have a
now?
lot of tissues in our car.
We got boxes of tissues all over the house. So we're having this conversation and we're both saying that. Who would want this? And I'm looking at her like, she's absolutely beautiful and she's walking with Jesus. I'm falling in love. And she's in Holland. We're just chatting at this point.
So he asks me, so can I pick you up from the airport? And I was like, sure. Yeah, I can do that.
I'm not wasting any time here.
So here's the funny part. I'm going from Connecticut. So I ended up having to go to Connecticut for a funeral last minute, which ended up making it longer. And coming through Philadelphia, I had to come through Philly to get to Phoenix in the layover. I'm sitting there, and it's packed. And it's like a whole U shape. And all of a sudden I see somebody walking, and I'm like, who is that? That looks like somebody I know. I'm in Philadelphia. And I'm like, that's Sean Serafino. And he was there for work. And I see him walking around, and I'm like, Sean. And he comes over, and of course we had to take our selfie and send it to his wife, because she's one of my really good friends. And so I was like, well, so I have to tell you, I'm meeting this guy. He's picking me up at the airport, and do you think you can come with me to get my suitcase? And he's like, sure. I'm like, well, he's Heather's cousin. That makes everything okay. So he ended up meeting Chuck, and Sean, he's tall and well-built, and he's like, hi there.
Yeah, he's ex-military. He's a helicopter test pilot, and he's a big boy. And he walks up and he's looking down and he's like, "How you doing?" He was playing the role, like we want to make sure there's no problems here, But it worked, and it was really cool. That was our first meeting.
Yeah, and Sean was my small group leader, so it was very appropriate.
Yeah.
But
So where'd you go after you picked her up? Did you go right
took
to
me home.
coffee?
It was nighttime.
No, it was nighttime. Right down the street here.
Did you propose on the way home?
I already posed 3 times before this. That you're slow, Frank.
Yeah,
This is true. We're having these conversations and we're doing FaceTimes now and we're talking. God knew, let's keep these guys apart for a little while here. And I joked 3 times over the phone about getting married. And even like she's like, tomorrow I'm getting on a plane and flying back to the United States. So this is what's going on. I said, okay. She was, I'm going to bed early, so I just want to say goodnight. I said, okay, good night, Mrs. Keels. And I hurry up and hang up the phone.
Yeah, so we already were like, okay, maybe this is where we're headed. And so I came home and I'm like, oh my goodness, I think I just met my husband. But so we ended up going to coffee the next morning. So
I drove down the street. She lived right here in Oregon. Sat in the driveway for 2.5 hours. Talked. She said, I need to go to bed, I'm tired. I said, can I pick you up for coffee in the morning? Picked her up for coffee in the morning. Yeah, and had coffee and talked some more. And now that she was in town, it was just like glue. It was like I didn't want to leave her side.
Our first date at my house was sitting on the couch listening to our favorite worship music.
We were walking out, listening to worship music, and she was singing, we were singing. It was amazing.
So there's a lot of similarities, enough differences, and our glue was God. And it was just so beautiful. And I definitely had a lot of fear going into a relationship, and kept giving it to God. And I was like, if you want me to do this, just keep showing me. And one of my really close friends said, can you serve God better with Chuck or without him? And I was like, wow. I never even thought about it that way, realizing that marriage can also be a mission field, and a way to serve. And so that's what happened.
Yeah, and so we started even talking about getting married. We don't waste any time. It was an interesting evaluation. These things that are so important to us are all in place, and the other things are deal breakers. Those are things we can talk about at night over dinner, and they're not deal breakers, but the things that we knew were truly important in a relationship and in life were there. And so we were thinking about maybe March getting married.
So let me timeline it. So he picked me up October 9th of 2019. We got engaged November 14th. And we got married January 1st. So we were Frank's first wedding of 2019.
2020.
2020, sorry.
2020, January 1st, right here in the spot. Yeah. Oh, there we are with Frank. Yeah.
That's how they went to the
There's
reception.
our limo.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And there's our boys.
that's our reception. We went to barbecues with our boys.
Yeah.
That was a great day.
Oh, it was amazing. It was amazing. And probably the thing that blew my mind was the fact that we were going to get married in March. We pushed it up and said, hey, let's just knock this out. First of all, we didn't wait till March, which you couldn't have gotten married in March. COVID took off and people weren't getting married anymore. So we were talking about it, we're like, wow, how cool was that happened? But we had just what, 5 or 6 weeks we planned of the entire wedding. It was absolutely beautiful. It was absolutely
Yeah,
beautiful.
it was a great day.
It was beautiful.
Where were you when you actually really proposed to her? And it was like, she knew it was legit help her.
And Gilbert,
Gilbert,
I started dragging her around because I was doing speaking events already, and I drug her to a speaking event, and we got home and were tired, and I already planned it and got a ring and everything, and proposed.
Did you actually ask her that way? Did you just say, let's just knock this thing out? Is that what you
We actually got on his knee and
That's an old baseball.
I have a picture.
Let's knock this thing out.
yeah.
So, a couple things. You mentioned that your first day you were at your house and listening to worship music, and you said you were singing. One of the things that people around Redemption Arcadia, who've been around here for a long time, know for a fact that there are 2 iconic congregational singers in our congregation. See, some of you are laughing, you know. They're both here tonight. Did you notice that? So, Ben, so it's so funny to me because somebody new in the church who's been around for 4 weeks, I'll say, so have you met Ben Bear yet? No, I don't know Ben Bear. I say, yeah, you know Ben Bear. He's the guy that sings and he's got the long hair. Oh yeah, I know Ben Bear. Every single time. And then the other iconic congregational singers, everybody knows you when you're singing. You have a beautiful voice.
Beautiful voice.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm praying for it to come back. I just had surgery and
We're praying for it to come back too. We miss it.
It was coming back before my surgery.
So here's the second thing. I know this is hard, and I know you've heard me talk to you about this before, but I want to say it again in the presence of these people in the live stream. Sarah passing away was just really hard. And you spoke at her funeral. And it was one of the most profound messages I had ever heard on the book of Isaiah. And you using Sarah's life and your relationship with her as the context for that. It was magnificent. And one of the things that I've pieced together since that time is I thought, man, I always knew Hannah was a very faithful believer, but when I heard you speak at her memorial service, I thought, Hannah draws from a very deep well. But that well gets dug deep through loss and grief and lament. It's those kinds of things that we hate and that we don't want to go through and that we think is always going to happen to somebody else, that actually God uses for His glory and our good. Even though 10 years ago you never would have defined where you are today as good.
Never thought that.
And so that's the strongest testimony for me. I mean, all these stories are great. They mean a lot, and we wanted to give you a way just to get them out there even further. But that for me has been the greatest encouragement for me, is the deep well that you both do, but specifically you because of Sarah's memorial service, the deep well you draw from because of your experience of loss and how you've handled that with Jesus. You've understood how important that is. So thanks for being able to share that with us.
Thank you. And it's interesting because about 4 months after we got married, the loss continued, and that's when my cancer spread and changed again. It morphed triple negative, which is the most aggressive breast cancer there is. and it actually fractured my neck. So when I went to the doctor and I was in so much pain. They took x-rays and they come back in, they're like, we just want to let you know you have a fracture. Your spine is fractured. And I was like, well, who walks around with a broken back? So,
You guys are.
that was, yeah, I know. Well, there's more. So that was May, and they fused my entire neck to the front. So I have a couple little scars here, which is the first time I started losing my voice. That summer, I started having trouble swallowing, partially from the surgery and partially from radiation, because one of my nodes on my chest was pressing on the pulmonary artery, so they did radiation on it, and it fried my esophagus, so I ended up having a feeding tube. So for about 7 weeks, I ended up having a feeding tube. So it was a really hard summer for me last year because I lost my voice, so I couldn't sing. I lost my ability to eat, and I'm a major foodie. So, it was like these losses, like not things I think I'd ever lose or consider, and again, these are things that are hard to deal with. They are for me, because they're things I really enjoy. And again, it brought me to, where do I go with it? I can only go to Him. And so I'm healing from that last September, October. And at the beginning of October, I started getting lower back pain. And about December, first week in December, we moved. So we moved to South Scottsdale from 3 blocks from here to another apartment. And I go to the doctor and I'm like, I am in so much pain. So they do an x-ray of my spine. And they're like, you have a fractured sacrum. And I'm like, who walks around with a broken back? Apparently me. So, yes. So, it was a lot of, last year was a lot of Him serving me. And since December, how many weeks ago is it now? The latest. So the latest is I have another fracture. My L4 was a compression fracture, so very much.
And so obviously what's going on is triple negative breast cancer is a wild animal. It's not controlled by hormone therapy and chemotherapy and radiation. It does whatever it wants. And we thought we had things under control because all this stuff in our upper body was gone. We're like, oh my goodness, a miracle. But there was a couple little spots that started in her lower back and her sacrum. And the pain started, and it was unbelievable. She went from, they got her to the hospital, they got the pain under control with medication and sent her back home.
And I was bedbound. I literally
She couldn't sit up.
for 2 weeks.
I mean, this is in the last, 6 weeks,
Yeah, 6 weeks.
5 weeks. So she can't sit up, she can't stand up, she can't walk. I'm everything. And the pain was getting worse. And so finally we get on the phone with these docs and we go, the pain's getting worse, what is going on? And the one doctor goes, get to the emergency room. They run her over to Osborne. Osborne looks at the MRIs and go, she needs emergency surgery tonight. They run her over to St. Joseph's. And we think it's going to be a 2 to 3 hour surgery where they're going to restructure her spine because it's starting to press on the nerves, and that's what's causing this excruciating pain. And she goes into this surgery, and I'm in the waiting room, and the doctor comes out 7 hours later. I was traumatized. I couldn't believe what just happened in my life. And so he tells me there's a lot more cancer, in there causing all these problems. The bones don't just get soft and break. There's cancer and they're causing all this, and the rest of the doctors weren't seeing all of this and how fast it was growing, and they let me go in just for an hour before I left the hospital because it was after visiting hours, and I refused to leave, and they said, you can come into, post-op and see her. She's in there now. And I'm in there when her eyes start to open, and she looks at me and she says, hold my hand. And I hold her hand for a little bit, and I know she's still kind of out of it. And so I leave, and I'm you could have just flicked me, I would have fell over, I was exhausted. And I get home and I fall over in the bed and I fall asleep. And I wake up at about 4 in the morning and I look at my phone and there's a text message about 1 in the morning. And it's from Hannah and she said, "What happened to me?" We didn't know what was coming up. The doctors didn't either until they actually started the surgery and started finding all of the cancer and all of the, they fused her spine. They screwed her, what do you call that, sacrum?
Yeah, well, they screwed everything into my hips too, so it's all.
They even put cement in her upper leg, femurs and stuff. Everything was breaking down.
Yeah, so.
So that Sunday that we had you come in and do the little All of Life interview.
That was 2 days before. I went
Yeah,
to
so
the
you had all of this then, but had no idea.
Yes, so
And you were
that's
just
2 days.
like, I'm a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, I was
Or
quite
laugh.
uncomfortable. But it was 2 days before the first time where I came home and ended up in bed.
Okay.
So yeah, that was pretty amazing.
So we've got about 20 minutes. I want to hear now what, out of all of this, you have started and are growing a ministry. So we want to hear a little bit about that. And in fact, there's a pretty famous Christian author named Bob Goff. This even got you an entree into him and being able to have him help you tell a story. So tell us a little bit about all of that.
Yeah, so when I met Chuck, he was doing a lot of phone calls with people, and I kept asking him, like, how are you doing this while you're working? And, like, have you ever thought about starting a nonprofit? He's like, yeah, but I have no idea how to do that. And I'm like, okay, so let's just talk about this and pray about this. And so once we got married, a month after we got married, we pushed our desks together and we started a nonprofit together. And we prayed over every page, every application, the very name of it, which we ended up calling it Living Hope Cancer Foundation. And the gist of it is that the doctor has the medical part. So you go to a doctor, they give you your diagnosis, your prognosis, your treatment plan. But that's it. They leave you go home, you're confused, you're scared, you're like just freaking out. And we've both been in that situation several times. And so what we do is help people navigate the spiritual mindset of cancer. And really what it is it's a way to lead them to Christ, because that's our only hope, and that's the only way you can get through cancer and do it well, and do it, thrive with it, and end up well, whether you die or live, right? So, do you have any more to add?
Yeah, I mean, basically, when the word cancer comes up, we don't ask somebody if they're a believer or non-believer. Come on in. And we start coaching them and working with them and what do we do next and all these things. And we formulated 5 pillars to our foundation. And the 5 pillars were the takeaways. You don't want to just tell them a story and send them away. You want to have them maybe some homework, a way to actually now address what we're talking about. And our 5 pillars came down to prayer, love, and the love was funny to me because when my neighbors started bringing over meals for me and my boys, I couldn't believe it. I loved it. They were just hugging and we were crying, and it was the coolest thing in the world. And I know it's healing. So prayer, love, juicing or nutrition. When you say nutrition, it's harder to get someone to change their whole diet, but I can get them to buy a juicer and start juicing and get some nutrition in their body, and so their immune system in their body starts to do what it's supposed to do in the first place. Essential oils is kind of a part of that also, so we mentioned essential oils, getting that in your body, on your body, and then moving your body, which is exercise. But those were our 5 takeaways. And we would tell people that, and they would go, okay, Chuck, I haven't been to church since my grandma took me when I was a little kid. We don't really pray a lot. And I go, okay, here's the deal. Cancer is way bigger than us, way bigger than us. And if you don't have faith, then you carry the stress and the worry. And if you have faith, you can give all that stuff that we can't change to God, and then the stress and worry lowers. And I understand that you don't have the faith, but is it okay if I pray with you?
And all of a sudden they're like, of course, they just been diagnosed with cancer. They want to know anything they can do. And I say a prayer with them, and we follow up with them. And over the next few weeks, few months, all of a sudden they're like, guess what, Chuck? When you mentioned prayer, we were like, we're probably going to do that pillar. And now we're not only praying together every day, but we're looking for a church in our area. And this crazy story of stage 4 cancer that I miraculously made it through had so many hidden blessings in it. And the blessings, just like Hannah talking about and Frank talking about her dealing with Sarah's death, the blessings that come from those things that you don't have a clue is what God's plan is in the long run. And if you would have told me that I would have been through a bout of cancer, that I would be married, that I would be coaching and helping cancer people, and if you would have told me that Chuck Keels would be talking about God and Jesus everywhere he goes and they can't shut him up, I would laugh if you said that a few years ago. But look at the path now. And you know, this is what always blows my mind, because now I know the people that we bumped into that day that just happened to be in our path, and then I know God had that plan, you know, a long time ago. I look at this and I go, there's people sitting here tonight that probably wasn't planning on going to come or be here and hear these stories, and then all of a sudden God kind of nudged them on the shoulder and said, you know, we want you there. There might be somebody on one of the lives on YouTube or Facebook that just maybe stumbled across us right now, but those are God's plans. Those are God's plans. I never thought that we would have a title of evangelist, because when you talk about Bob Goff, we had a chance to hang out with Bob out in San Diego, and my question was, because I'm new at this, you know, I'm really new at this, and Hannah's been a big help helping me learn the Bible and really get into it, and Bob was kind of a mentor. It's like, you've circled the world and you've been on the bestseller list so many times. And I'm like, but you didn't go to school to be a pastor. What's your title? I need to know this. I need to know this. Tell me. And he said, I'm just a dude. He said,
A dude for God.
I'm just a dude for God.
Yeah.
I'm just a dude. And I looked at him and I said, guess what? I'm just a dude too for God.
Yeah.
So the foundation, we launched in February of last year. We launched it on our passion and our purpose and where God wanted us to be, not really knowing what was going to happen with it. Throughout the year, our board of directors, they told us on a phone call one time, because we told them how many hours we spent coaching people on the phone or in their living room, or we've flown to places, Houston and Franklin, Tennessee, and Ohio and Traverse City, Michigan, to spend time with the family. And our board of directors is like, you're spending 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours on the phone with cancer people each day. What are you going to do in 6 months or a year from now? And I go, I don't know. I had a landscaping business, and you just buy another truck and hire some more guys. I don't know what to do with this. And they said, you need to establish some curriculum.
Yeah, so we ended up we're working on making a video resource library, and the very first entry to it is a 40 video series called the Cancer Roadmap Project. It's 2 to 3 minutes each, and it really walks people through what we coach. It's for people with cancer, but it's really for anybody. So we intermingle our faith and all those good things in there.
Yeah.
So we talk all about that.
So one of the other things though is that there are times when you'll come and you'll say, hey, we're not going to be around the next 3 weeks. We've got 9 different places that we're going to be speaking at. Tell us a little bit about these speaking tours.
Yeah, so we just did one recently. We added getting to see our family because we hadn't seen them for a year. So we went to Ohio, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. And while we were there, people just helped us book events. And so we were able to have these sort of like tonight, where we could just share our story and share our testimony.
And that's, you've been able to meet people with cancer and also,
Both.
That's the interesting thing about social media is we're doing these speaking events that we plan, we post that we're going to be there, we try to plan, as soon as we know about it, if it's a couple months off, we post it on our social media, and it gets legs. And we have people showing up we've never met before because they've been following us, and they're kind of blown away that we're doing what we do, and we want to be transparent. We want to be transparent. We want to show people what you can do even though you have a diagnosis with cancer, because the other alternative is to stay in the house and stay on the couch and pull the covers up and let fear take over. And the other alternative is what we call get up and live. And we put on our hats and our shirts and on our arms and our skin, because get up and live means you have a choice today to stay in that bed, or you can get up and do something. And it's different for everybody. If they've had a surgery, or we understand that it might be a breathing class laying on your living room floor. But we have people hiking and biking and doing these things and taking selfies and showing us and going, look what we're doing, thank you. And that's what's probably blown me away the most is the outreach that we don't know about. A buddy of mine, he was coaching at Buffalo. He just got moved over to Kentucky, got a head coaching job. And he calls me up and he's like, hey, how you doing? I go, pretty good. How's Hannah? Now, we've been through a lot, but she's doing pretty good right now. He goes, I want to tell you something. Last night I was telling about 15 or 20 of my neighbors we gathered around and talking, and I told them your story. And I was like, wow. And so when I hang up the phone, the thought was, how many people are telling our stories? Mm-hmm. How many people are seeing this? And now that we're on social media with the Cancer Roadmap Project, we are getting the letters and emails from where?
A lot of other countries, South Africa, Ethiopia,
Australia, Brazil.
Yeah, so it's going past
It's a reach.
America.
It's a reach.
Yeah, and the one thing I really want to say, well, this is one of the reasons that we're up here tonight, is that we really want to also be available not just to the unbelievers but to believers as well, because that is something I have my own experience with as a Christian, being faced with cancer. You are challenged. Your faith is so challenged, and the goodness of God is something that is a challenge. To believe that God is good and allow you to go through these hard things, and so that's something that I've personally had a lot of experience with recently, getting to walk along a lot of women with breast cancer that are believers, and just encouraging them through scripture and prayer that God is good in the middle of all this. He wants our worship. And when you worship in the storm, that's when the enemy flees. And just to realize that you're victorious no matter what. You're victorious in this world, and you're victorious when you die. And to not have that fear, not to live in fear. Because that's what the enemy wants. He wants us to all live in fear, right? So that's been something that God's really impressing on my heart, and to help teach other people.
That's an amazing testimony. Thank you for that. I've been sitting here thinking one of the hardest things for people to do today, with the busyness, careers, all of these things are good, but with just the busyness of life, the pressures of life, relationships, family, career, school, all that stuff, one of the hardest things for people to do is just to be available. It sounds to me like you have a ministry of availability.
Absolutely. We kind of learned some of that from Bob Goff. He put his phone number in the back of all of his books. So when people pop up on, different social media sites and ask a question, I go, this is more than we can just toss back and forth here. Here's my number, and stick it on a post and get 4 or 5 calls from that number. But being available, being in the moment, sharing the fact that, today is a blessing. These are all just, lessons that we've learned, and now we're hoping that we can rub off on everybody else. And, the amazing moral of the entire story is we are bringing people to Him.
Yeah, and I think a big part of it is recognizing that God orchestrates every second of our lives, every single one. And I think that's just so beautiful to realize, there's no accidents, there's no coincidences. They're all God wings.
So what I want to do is, you guys have a table back there, and I want you to have an opportunity to get back there and have people talk to you, and you can talk about the stuff that you have back there. But I want to pray for you first, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
And can we have what are the pastors or elders who are here? Would you guys come up too?
Both Tyler's.
Both Tyler, we got the T's.
Hey, real quick, you guys, we were met with a cancer doctor today about what we're going to do going forward because things are changing and we need, more advice. So we're getting those second, third opinions. We're in the battle. So if nothing else, pray for Hannah. If nothing else, pray for Hannah.
Hannah and Chuck, you guys, by the power and the filling of the Holy Spirit and the resurrected Christ, are such an encouragement to us, such a blessing to us, and we're grateful for you. So, Father God, we just pray your blessings, your protection, your wisdom, and your hope on Hannah and Chuck. And for Hannah's immediate and current challenges, we pray that you would give her clarity, that you would help keep her comfortable as much as possible. Help her know that she is loved, most importantly by you, but also by her faith community, and by her husband. And God, that you would build her up for whatever it is that you have for her during this time. Whatever it is that you are going to have her to do for others. And Father, for the amazing way that you put these two people together, the way they found each other, by you calling those shots, and by Chuck saying, let's knock this thing out. God, thank you for that. Thank you that you have constructed this story as a testimony of your goodness, of your blessing, of your glory, of your salvation. So God, I pray your blessings on them. Pray that you would be glorified in all of this. We thank you for their testimony, and we pray all of that in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen. Let's thank Chuck and Hannah for being here tonight. And you guys can go ahead and head out there. So
So we want to invite you to the back table. We have both our books for sale. We also have a couple things. We have merchandise on our website. We have a couple samples up there.
Make sure
And
you
we
get a
also-
bracelet. Those are free. Get some business cards, all that stuff.
Stickers.
We want to make sure that you, if you hear the word cancer in your life, which I hope you don't, you're going to go, oh my gosh, you got to talk to Hannah and Chuck and make sure that you know who we are, where to find us, and all those amazing things.
And we do also invite you to consider participating and helping us, support us monthly. Even a small amount would be happy for us. This is what we do full time, so
Yeah.
we would appreciate that.
And thank you, Frank, for
You
having
do,
us.
you get them up.
it's been our pleasure, our blessing. And will Jax be back there available to be pet?
Signing autographs.
Oh, he's signing autographs.
Signing autographs.
Well, let's do that now. Thank you all very much for coming. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it.
Don't say nothing yet.
Blessings from New Zealand. Just got blessings from New Zealand, I saw that.
Yeah.
All right, well, give that to me when you start. Stop it.